see that. Now, I'm also excited for us to have Gary Bolles. I have been following this man for years and his content for years. Gary is chair of the future of work for Singularity University. And I tease Gary when I talk to him all the time. Singularity University is not about singularity, and it's not a university. It's actually sort of a Silicon Valley think tank. And Gary himself has been at the cutting edge of the future of work, not necessarily because of the pandemic. The work environment has been changing at a faster pace. So he is one of those thought leaders that I've learned so much from. And I'm really thrilled that we get a chance to share some of Gary's thoughts with the Leadership Greater Washington community. I asked Gary to first share about 10 minutes of some of his thoughts and perspectives, and then look forward to getting your questions. I've had a conversation with him for the podcast. I can talk to Gary for hours. Actually, his son is also right here in Cleveland Park in Washington, D.C. So we've had a chance to break bread together too. So really excited, Gary, to have you virtually with the leaders of Leadership Greater Washington. Really excited, looking forward to your thoughts.
No, first off, Mahan, you know that from now on, you're going to have to introduce me at every single session that I do, right? So because that's about as flattering as it gets. So I really appreciate the introduction. It's wonderful to be connected to the community. We feel very, even though I'm based in San Francisco here, we feel very deep ties to the DC area. The family condo is right on the cusp of Cleveland Park, Woodley Park, right across from the zoo. So and Mahan and I in around Thanksgiving were able to actually engineer an in-person lunch, which to me was pretty unique for the time. So it's great that we've actually been able to see each other and without a screen in between us. So so yeah, I did want to offer just a couple of thoughts. You've heard way too many times people saying these are extraordinary times. You've probably gotten the memo about these seismic shifts in the worlds of work and learning and our organizations. And so I wanted to just I would call these sort of fire starter ideas and just give a little framing that we could use as a jumping off point. And then I'm asked a lot about sort of practical suggestions, and we can take time to explore those. But let me just sort of set the table with just a couple of slides. And then, yeah, let's just make it a conversation. So, and please, as Rebecca and Mahan was saying, use the chat line. People often ask me, what are some of the things that we've lost in the pandemic era? I think we know it's personal connections and seeing people face to face, but we've gained one or two things. And one of them is you don't have thought bubbles in meetings. You can't see this little bubble pop up over somebody's head, but we do have the chat line and the Q&A. So please tell me your thought bubbles, and I'm going to post a number of links and ideas in here too. So so let's just go ahead and why waste a perfectly good pandemic? Let's go ahead and take advantage of the cards that were dealt. So let me just go ahead and show you a couple of these slides, and then let's make it a dialogue. So Mahan, can you see that? Is that working? Yes. Participants can now see your application. Okay. So I'm not going to repeat what Mahan said. The one thing I want to add is that I've got this new book, Next Rules of Work, but also I've got 9 courses on LinkedIn Learning with about 1 million learners, and it's things like learning agility and learning mindset and leading with agility. And it's been a great platform to reach a lot of people with a lot of the ideas I'm going to be talking about here. So, so that's one thing to just know, that if any of this really interests you. A lot of the framing I tend to focus on when people ask me to talk about issues related to the future of work, learning, and the organization is kind of fall into 4 domains: individuals, organizations, communities, and countries. And I'm going to assume that a lot of our discussion today is going to be on communities and how each of you try to basically be the ecosystem that you want that can help all of your ecosystem members to thrive. But I'm happy to dive into what you might want to be focusing on with your organizations or for different individual populations, especially as we look at so many of the groups that were especially disadvantaged by what I call the Great Reset. So I'm just going to throw a couple questions out there and then answer them. So the first one is, What's happening to work, especially? Well, Mahan was talking about Singularity University. The reason that it's not about the singularity is Ray Kurzweil, one of our co-founders, wrote a book called "The Singularity is Near." Basically, it was this mythical time where robots and software are smarter than humans, and that's not I think, the most effective construct. It's much more that we have these what we call exponential technologies that are having really, really seismic impacts on our lives. And of course, the rhetoric around the future of work pre-COVID was that robots and software are going to take your job. Well, that's not actually happened. So instead, what we think is the likely impact is really that it's the pace and the scale of change. It's that these exponential technologies are having such a seismic impact on our lives. But then we thought these were going to be the ones that were going to be the greatest drivers of change, and then along came a virus. And so my framing for what we're going through, one way for you to picture what's happening to all of us right now is that we've actually gone through three phases. There's what I call the Great Reset. There's a falling off the cliff phase. That was March 2020. There's a riffling along the bottom phase. That's what we've been doing, sort of a fever chart in between. And then now we're sort of at this inflection point where we can start to lift our heads and think differently about work and learning and the organization. And hopefully we can take away some of these insights that we've gotten. But there's so many different issues and ideas. I talk about the Great Reset, but you've seen headlines for the Great Resignation and upskilling and reskilling and remote and distributed work. It's dozens and dozens and dozens of issues. It's a rapidly changing landscape. Why is that? Why is it changing so quickly? Well, my framing is that these are changing rules. We've got these industrial era rules that we've inherited. We've got these sort of newer rules that a lot of tech companies were sort of adopting, more nimble ways to work. But then along comes a pandemic, and suddenly now we're all experiencing what I call the next rules. So what are those? Well, there's all these holdovers from that industrial era. We were pretty analog. We saw each other in person. We had hierarchies for our organizations, which goes back to the time of Alexander. Rigid work roles. Work was a workplace. We had to only trust people because we could manage them when we could see them. I called it management by surveillance. And leadership was kind of like a noun. We talk about leadership like it's a thing. And I believe we are co-creating the next rules together as we speak. We're going to shift more and more to having digital approaches to the ways that we do our work. It's not going to be so much a workforce or a network. It's going to be what I call a work net, a much more fluid group of people solving problems for your organization stakeholders. Work's going to shift from these very rigid work roles to much more problem-centric work and project-centric work. Work becomes the thing you do, no matter where that is. It's not a place, it's a set of activities. It's a set of problems that you're solving. Managers need to become much more what I call team guide. That comes from the thinking of Esther Wojcicki, a good friend who wrote the book Moonshots in Education. And she talks about how teachers need to go from being the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. Skills, we need to focus more and more on human skills. That is the coin of the realm. That's how we're going to solve the problems of today and tomorrow. And then as Mahan knows, I'm sometimes accused of being the word police, but I don't say leadership. I talk about leading a lot. It's a verb. Anybody can do it. And so if you want to sort of thread all these together, it's really about human-centric work. The whole idea is we need to make work more for humans. Well, how do we do that? How do we lead through this uncertainty? How do we make work more human-centric? Well, I talk about three legs of the stool, and during our conversation, I want to come back to these again and again, but it's mindset, skill set, and tool set. And the whole idea is that the way you think, the culture of an organization, the way people behave comes from their mindset, their framing about how they approach problems. Skills this is how we solve problems as humans. We have a wide range of skills, many of which we don't know, and we need to continually develop those. And then tools. We tend to focus a lot on technologies when we, here in Silicon Valley, but we need to have the right tool set to be able to build the next rules of work, to actually be more fluid organizations. So if we could wave a magic wand, what would we want the best possible mindset, skill set, and tool set to be? Well, There's a wonderful book called Mindset by a woman named Carol Dweck, and she talks about growth mindset. What we really need is to each have a growth mindset. When it comes to skill set, I talk a lot about we need to be problem solvers who are adaptive, creative, and with empathy. It just so happens the acronym is PACE, because the pace and scale of change is what we're all experiencing. But we need to each develop this sort of next generation, this 21st century skill set. And then we need to have a new tool set. We need to have new techniques that we use and how we get people to come together to solve problems. These are things you can do within your organization, within your agency, within the healthcare system. You can do it within your community, within groups like this. Techniques that we can use to rapidly, dynamically bind around problems and solve them together. And then there are underlying technologies. There's a range of things we can use to be able to collaborate, to be able to augment our skills, to be able to solve problems much more effectively and more rapidly. So I'm going to stop there. And there's a bunch of tactical things, that we can talk about that I think could be useful in helping people to be able to understand the how of this. But this is sort of the table that I wanted to set, is that we're going through a great reset. We're in that sort of third phase. We're coming out of that uncomfortable middle into a new phase where we have a tremendous opportunity to design work for humans. And we'll talk about, I think, some of the steps to go through for that. But it begins with mindset. We all need to have that next generation skill set. But as I'm fond of saying, mindset eats skill set for lunch. If we have a growth mindset and the mindset that we are up to the task of continually creating more human-centric work, we're going to emerge from this period so much stronger than we were before, and we're going to prepare ourselves for an exponential future.
Hey, Gary, so thank you for setting some of the background. And again, I'll get started with some questions and welcome the opportunity to take questions from those of you attending also. Submit those to me in Q&A. One of the challenges, Gary, and I know you've written a lot about the blind spots that we all have. And many of us, the more experience we have, and the more positional authority we have in organizations, if anything, our blind spots grow. So I'm finding part of what you're saying, I can see a lot of people attending nodding and listening to you, nodding and saying, yes, that makes sense. I've got it. How can we bring other people along? So would love to hear some of your thoughts with respect to blind spots and how we can reduce some of our blind spots as we tackle our mindsets.
Now, that's a great question, Vahan. So because what happens, I mean, there's a unique set of functions of our cognition, of the way these amazing machines called our brains work. And unfortunately, some of them are really, really useful to us, but some are a little more challenging. That is, they don't help to create the advantages that we want. My good friend Dan Ariely, who as a behavioral psychologist writes a lot about how we do things sort of against our own best interests in many cases. One of the peculiar aspects of our mindset is that we often are blind to our own skills. We're blind to our own capacities, and we're often blind to those in others as well. I use a picture of an iceberg. I say, so think of your own skills. You can probably name a couple that immediately come to mind, but you have so many experiences. You've been on this planet for a good period of time. You've solved so many problems. You've had a range of different work contexts and school contexts, and you have so many different skills you've developed and honed throughout your life. We don't have the process for doing that inventory. And so one of the first blind spots is for ourselves. And so it just so happens I don't have enough college to stuff into a thimble. I sort of fell into the family business when I was 19, and I was trained as a career counselor. My father was a recovering minister who ended up writing a book called What Color Is Your Parachute? So imagine you're 19 years old and you're trained as a career counselor and you're helping others to be able to remove some of their blind spots, to understand their own skills, to be able to think about what kinds of careers they might want to have, to open up the aperture for what the possibilities might be. And you, obviously the takeaway has to be do what you love, right? And so that's the first step, is to do self-inventory. And I don't care whether you use strengths finders or what's called the flower exercises from Parachute, or there's a range of tools we've got on a Parachute that we point to. I don't care what the process is. The more you know about yourself, you know about your own skills, you know about your own preferences, you have a North Star in your life of the things that you want to do, the less blind you will be to your own capacity for solving problems. Then you need to apply it to the people around you. Again, we tend to hire people and they're icebergs too. There's this little bit of skills that we know about, their experiences that we know about that we hired them for, but we need to open that aperture as well. We need to treat them as whole human beings. Remember the first Zoom calls that you got on with your coworkers or your employees? Oh, you have a guitar on the wall. I didn't know you play guitar. You've got kids. You've got a sick aunt at home. I didn't know any of those things were true. You've got a soccer. You play soccer? I play soccer. There's this part of the human being below the waterline that they're not often aware of, and we're certainly not aware of. We didn't send them the signals that we cared in many cases. And now we need to care. We need to care about that whole person. We need to especially care about their mental, not just their physical health, because as we all emerge into that third phase of hopefully the recovery from the pandemic, we have to be much more intentional about making sure, as I often say, no human is left behind. We need to make sure that every single person, we understand what is still at risk for them, what are still their challenges. If you look at the Great Recession, there were many millions of people that still had not fully recovered from the economic and personal impact of that reset. And then along came the pandemic. And so this is, I think, one of the greatest challenges for us is to see understand the way that we have blind spots about ourselves and about those around us, and then to make the authentic human commitment to want to really understand the lived experience of others. And that will then be a tremendous asset to bring into the processes we're all going to need to be able to build what work needs to be in the post-pandemic era.
So that understanding and that mindset really helps, Gary. I appreciate your thoughts on that. One of the questions I'm consistently getting at this point, Gary, from whether it's my clients or interactions in the community, is the near-term future of work before then we go into further out future of work. Organizations have settled on, we're going to be back 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or some elements of flex work. But there is a lot of anxiety and stress about that future of work. Yeah. What are your thoughts and what are you seeing with respect to approaches of organizations to the near-term future of work before we talk about a little further out?
So you've hit the nail on the head. When people talk about the future of work, it's normally not about that distant future. Sure, we could all imagine a time when there'll be so many robots that we'll all be sitting around eating grapes and bonbons. But it's normally about the near-term future of work. It's the fog is really thick down the highway, but as far as I think I can make it out, that's what I care about right now, is what are we doing? The reason I showed the waves of work is we are co-creating those next rules of work together. And so that's a really challenging time. Like nobody has the answer. There's tons of consultants that will tell you, oh, we have the formula for how you get people back into the office. And that's it. No, but they're all making it up. They're all making it up. So it's a cottage industry for consultants whenever there's uncertainty. And as humans, we can only deal with uncertainty for so long. That falling off the cliff phase, we thought, oh, that's as bad as it gets. No, actually, when you stretch out this kind of uncertainty, it makes it really, really difficult. So the near-term future of work is a couple things. First off, it's accepting that these black swan events, like a pandemic, are probably the new normal or the new abnormal. Today it's a pandemic, tomorrow it's generalized artificial intelligence, or a war that has ripple effects throughout our lives. And so let's just accept this is probably the new normal. Secondly, the focus for the near term is, how do you think of, what's your mindset with the people with whom you work? And if you are someone has more responsibility in the organization, if you're leading in the organization, then how do you think about the people that you have some influence over their behavior? And if you're working in a group and you actually are you're working with peers more often, how do you think about that context? What's the general mindset for people in the organization? And what's the process for which you will all, on an ongoing basis, try to determine how work should work? So let me just pop up one slide that is sort of a synthesis. I know it sounds a little much, but I did 110 talks and interviews last year. I'm on a pace even faster than that this year. And so I've tried to synthesize from a lot of the discussions that we've had and a lot of the insights that we've gotten. And the basic question I get from people is, okay, how? So here's a set of steps to be thinking about. So the first one that we see is that you have to, if you are in any position of being able to lead, you've got to communicate transparently and relentlessly. You've got to tell people, I've never been through a pandemic before. I'm assuming you haven't. We're all making this up as we go along. It's one of the requirements of leading that you're transparent, you are communicating, you are emulating what you want others to do, which is to communicate constantly. You've got to be able to tell people we're making this up as we go along, and to be able to communicate your own interests and biases and then workshop that with others. So the first step is make it really, really clear to people just how challenging these times are, but that we're going to solve this together. The second is
Gary, before you go on
Sure,
from that, I just wanted to underline that and mention one of the needs that a lot of us have is the need for certainty.
yes.
And some of what we look for is at times in times of uncertainty, we look for people that pretend to have some clarity or certainty with respect to where things are headed. And that ends up being a negative cycle where some of the individuals I interact with in leadership roles feel like their teams and their organizations are looking to them for certainty. So would love for you to go a little bit more into this, because this is a real challenge that I'm seeing where the people I've had conversations with, they nod and they understand it, but they say, but that's not what my organization is looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, honey, I mean, you're starting from the right point, which is around mindset, right? And so we like certainty up to a certain point. I mean, we like things to be a little risky sometimes in our lives, or if life was completely certain, then that sounds pretty boring. But we like manageable uncertainty. And so when something happens like this Great Reset, we can deal with uncertainty for a period of time, and then we start looking around for anything. We look for information. Here I am in Silicon Valley. We point to a lot of the way that startups deal with things. So think of a startup. You will never have enough time, enough resources, or enough information to make decisions, like ever, because you're a startup. You don't know who your customer is. You don't know what they want. You don't have enough money. You're going to run out of money really, really soon. And so you have to basically accept as much information as you can gather and then make the best decision that you can. So that's why I talk about this as a co-creation process. So you don't know, none of us knows what this summer is going to look like. We could all be high-fiving in the hallways, getting together in huge parties. We could be traveling around the world, or we could be having another wave, or we could be in lockdown for whatever reason. We could find that no, that's actually not possible. So let's just accept that we don't know. Now, how do we make the best decisions in the under the current conditions? Well, an awful lot of it is co-creation. So the more transparent you can be with the people with whom you work, and then you can all accept, all right, let's work together to understand what information we have, what decisions can we make, and then what processes can we put in place so that we can make the best decisions this week. And then how are we going to iterate next week and the week after and the week after? So what you find is that, for instance, for a lot of teams, what they do is they say, well, I have no idea really what's going to happen next month, whether or not we're going to be able to get together in the office. What can we do this week? What's going on with the mix of all the things that we need to do? Oh, Mary, you need to come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Fred, you need to come in on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. How can you have a process by which you are continually workshopping the decisions you can make today based on the information that you have? And then how can you acknowledge that there is a stress that comes for all of us with uncertainty? And when we're in stress, we often make decisions not as wisely or as well as we wish. We sometimes have, we obviously, we've got more stress on us from a mental health standpoint. We sometimes are more prone to anger. All these are things to be more transparent about and to admit, to agree between us that we don't have all the answers. What we're doing together is figuring out a process that we can continually follow. Does that make sense?
It does. And therefore, again, for the leaders, there has to be that growth mindset perspective that you mentioned, Carol, it goes into,
Yeah.
is that we don't have the answers yet. I don't have the clarity yet. We are going to continually be iterating, testing, working on it as we move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, great. And thanks for posting the general list. I obviously wasn't following the instructions. So I talk about rules and then I don't follow them. It's a mistake. So all right, and then really quickly, just to show the rest of the points that you popped in, but I just wanted to run through them in real time. Is second, we often don't really understand. We don't have a finger on the pulse. We make assumptions about the people that we work with and the people who work for us, but that we often have blind spots. We think that we understand what their priorities are, but it's critical to have a process for continually getting that finger on the pulse. And the larger the organization, the more regularly you have to do that. You've got to continually be challenging your assumptions. I think you're okay coming to the office. I think you have the time that you need to be able to meet your deadlines and do your deliverables for this project, but let me challenge those assumptions and let me make sure that we're all in sync. In this era, it's also critical. I don't know if any of you are dealing with what euphemistically has been called the Great Resignation, but I urge people to do is if one of your challenges in this era is hiring and retaining, you've got to rethink that entire process. You've got to rethink how you want humans to come in and address the problems that you have to be solved through your organization stakeholders. And you've got to make that as inclusive a process as possible. Now is the time to do it. Let's stop talking about changing these processes and unbias the hiring process. Try to soften the walls of the organization, do mentorships, apprenticeships, offer project work so that people can test out you and you can test out people to do more and more of the work, and make sure that you're paying them a great wage, and make sure that you're paying micro benefits and doing the things that you need to so that they can have the kind of meaningful, well-paid work that they need. If you could just imagine you were going through your own hiring process, are you being communicated with as well as you'd like? Are you being treated as a human being? You always also, we see people have to redesign work roles and compensation because you're finding that pretty much across the board you're having to pay more for talent nowadays. I was talking about co-creating that flexible guidelines for work and schedules. Do that in your team on an ongoing basis. We find that the growth mindset, the way you get that for free is if you encourage every worker to have a set of career goals, to do some kind of self-inventory, and then to have some North Star direction that they're going, that they're driving towards so they continually learn. And then finally, I mentioned briefly earlier, but you've got to change that role of the manager. They've got to stop thinking they have to be the one with all the answers. And they've got to be the one that actually has the best questions, that is continually coming into meetings and situations and saying, all right, how can we together solve this problem? And then sit back and only hop in as you see people need help to be able to get over a hump, but how you can continually empower others to become problem solvers.
And in doing that, Gary, one of the challenges is that both because of the technology and because of the volume of communication, there's a sense of collaboration overload. So you mentioned that there is a need for collaboration, but typically the people I interact with say I'm just overwhelmed with it. When you look at the organizations that approach this collaboration in this new environment best, what are some of their practices and approaches?
So here's one way from a mindset standpoint to think about it. So and I think there was actually a recent article, I don't know if it's heard of Business Review, but it was talked about collaboration overload. I think you've hit a key point for a lot of people is, so first off, it's important to understand for each of us that we have alternating rhythms in our work and our lives. It should the most effective work doesn't come from meeting. That's a failure for all of us because there's no alternating rhythms in that. It's just going from one team-oriented communication to another. And as humans, we thrive on variety. We thrive on having different contexts for our work. What is critical coming into this next phase is that we're intentional about this. And so the more you can think about how you can break down the work that you do. In the book, I've got something called the Aristotle Canvas, which is a very quick way of just understanding your own work, and that can be a useful tool. But the more you can understand the work that you do, the problems that you solve, the kinds of contexts in which you solve those best, then you start to see patterns and you see, you know what, I kind of do my best work on Monday mornings when I have no meetings and no calls. And then we do best as a team when we get together on Tuesdays and Thursdays because we've had a couple of days to be able to work independently and then come together and we have much more effective meetings. All of that is critical to be intentional about and to actually start making more effective decisions about when you engage with others and how you do, and then when you are doing your work independently or in smaller groups. Now, different companies have different approaches to this. There's a company called Asana, and they have no meetings Tuesdays. No meetings. Like you're not allowed to schedule one. Get your work done. Just and so that's one cultural artifact. That's one mindset for an organization. Whatever that is, you can come up with that collaboratively together. And how you honor those times where you have to seal yourself away from those interactions with others. Some increasingly organizations are saying, let's look at 4-day work weeks. So we only are collaborating together a certain number of days. Let's look at where we won't send emails to each other on evenings and weekends. We will honor each other's independent time. Whatever that process can be for you as an individual and for you as a team, experiment, co-create with others, but then make these commitments and follow these commitments. If you block out time to think and to walk and to get away from your screen, honor that time. If you told yourself you were going to go to the gym this day, do that so that you have those alternating rhythms that you honor in your life.
So an important point that you make, Gary, is that there is a need for that co-creation. A lot of people that I have conversations with, and I know it's the same for you, are looking, as you said, for the answer of this is the way it's going to be, this is how you should approach it. And the answer is closer to what you mentioned, in that for every single organization and every single team, the answer will be different, which is a very different paradigm than what we have been used to and what we have grown up used to in business. So there is a need for co-creation, experimentation, and testing based on that co-creation. There are no again, like you, I do lots of talks and talk to the best thought leaders globally, including yourself. There are no set paths forward. We need to, as responsible parties in our organizations, to have the conversations, to co-create, test, and then move forward based on those tests.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're exactly right. And it's entirely possible that eventually you'll find there's some patterns that work, and then hopefully just everybody has the right mindset, and that can change because we keep seeing these these whacks to the side of the head that make us adapt. But if we do this work now, we're going to be much better prepared for any big shifts that come down the pike.
Hey, Gary, I would like to jump briefly to the community society level of this and then come back to the organizational
Yeah.
level. And I would also, in addition to your book, highly recommend Azim Azhar's book on the exponential age, where he talks about how computing, renewables, additive manufacturing, and biotech are hitting an exponential stage of growth, and it's very hard for our minds to grasp exponential growth,
Yeah.
and how all of these will significantly change how we live and operate in the years to come. This is immediate years. This is not decades down the line.
Yeah.
Now, this also causes challenges for organizations and communities where there is significant displacement of jobs. Right now in Bentonville, Arkansas, Walmart is already delivering using autonomous vehicles, driving, drones. So all of these technologies, this is not something in the way distant future, are going to impact us within the next few months and few years. So what are your thoughts with respect to community leaders in the way we need to think about this future and bringing the rest of the community along, rather than what has happened, which is more and more people falling behind, which is part of what Mark Burgell is also trying to tackle?
Yeah, absolutely. So here's one way to picture it, I guess, for people to think about it. So, and my economist friends hate it when I oversimplify like this, but it's a good picture to help us think about how in our communities we need to prioritize. So, if this is all the demand for work, like this is all the compensated jobs and gigs and all that sort of stuff, and this is all the supply, this is us humans. Just think of a work market as essentially being sort of the overlap between those. And on this end, that's people you can't hire, haven't been able to find them yet. And on this end, it's people that are unemployed, right? And hopefully in the middle, the overlap is they're employed. Well, they're not always employed well. About over 40% of the workers in the United States work on an hourly wage, and that tends to make the work very precarious. They often don't have consistent shifts. In many communities around the country, the minimum wage might be sufficient for an individual, like a really young person, to have a very low burn lifestyle, but it's certainly not sufficient for a family in an expensive urban area. And so what you find is that these are constantly oscillating. The demand is constantly changing and the supply is constantly changing. What we have now is a big gap in the workforce. Now, in the past, the rhetoric was robots and software are going to take away the demand. And then we're going to have a lot of unemployed people because there just won't be as much need. There won't be as many jobs. Well, what we're seeing now is there's a historic number of open jobs, but not a matchup of people. And so what we need to do is we need to change our mindset in our communities, where what we're doing is, rather than thinking of safety nets, we're thinking of employment systems. That is, how can we design our communities so that the default is that people have access to meaningful, well-paid work, not that the system only kicks in when something bad happens, right? In the US, we have what I call an unemployment system. In Germany and the Nordics, it's an employment system. We went from about 3.7% to 11.2% unemployment in 3 weeks in March 2020. Germany went from 5.1 to 5.7%. And it's because they have a system designed to keep people employed. So what does that mean you can do with your community is understand the demand and the supply. That is, really understand who the workers are and what they're trained for and what the demand is. And then how can you leverage resources to be able to help people who are inevitably, their skill set is no longer going to be in demand. Today they're working as pushing paper around, And the real demand is needing to be able to do an AI programmer. Well, that doesn't mean that if you were processing paper, you are designed to be a programmer. There's probably plenty of other work that you could be doing, but you have to have an inventory. You have to have an understanding of who the workers are, what kind of work they've been trained for, and then leverage community resources, your community colleges, your land grant universities. Build the kinds of training programs that help them while they're still working to get trained in the next skills that are in demand. And that way you have a system that is no longer basically only kicking in when something bad happens. It's instead biased towards keeping people constantly trained and constantly in work.
And that is something that I know the leaders involved in Leadership Greater Washington would get excited hearing about, because it's up to us to make sure that we create those opportunities and those systems in our community. Now, one of those great leaders asked the question and said something I totally agree with. Monica says the opposite of when we're talking about exponential growth. Almost all leaders would describe their ability to adapt during these times as advanced. I totally agree with you, Monica.
Yeah.
And they see themselves as performing in the next rules arena until the company growth or results are challenged, which is happening more and more in these economic times. When this happens, I see those same leaders reverting back to the old rules as their playbook for success. With the economic pressures many industries are experiencing, how will we lead through this?
Yeah. So, Monica, it's a great question. So I'll give you a couple different use cases, because a lot of it just depends upon where that pressure is coming from. So if it's a public company and you've got shareholders, or it's a private company but you've got shareholders, and you've made certain commitments to in terms of profitability. I've spent a lot of time in what I think of as what I call the inclusive capitalism arena. I co-founded something called SoCap, Social Capital Markets, back in 2008, which is the largest gathering of impact entrepreneurs and investors. And I've written extensively about how we need to have just a completely new mindset about capitalism. And so if it's an organization that is driven by its commitment to shareholders, then you need a new dialogue. I talk a lot in the book about that an organization is essentially a platform for creating value for stakeholders. That's kind of what organizations are. And of course, your workers are one of your key stakeholders, if not the most key stakeholders. And if you've got all this pressure from shareholders on profitability and so on, then you need a new set of agreements between them to get yourself through difficult times. There are plenty of companies in the United States that decided not to lay off when the pandemic hit. They found themselves so much more able to meet the needs of customers when the lights were starting to turn back on than many of their competitors. And so first I say, go to wherever that conversation needs to happen to try to figure out how, when the pressure increases, when the dial goes up, you can actually have the kinds of supports you need to make tough decisions that keep people employed, pay them well, and hopefully help them to continue to develop. If you're not a public company, but you're talking about government agency, well, it comes down to training. You know, one of the reasons I put up these points about how to change the role, the mindset of that person formerly known as the manager to much more of a team guide is, yes, under pressure, we often find that we feel that we need to make different decisions, or we default back to previous behaviors. You're right that most managers would probably say that they're better than the average, just like most drivers would say they're better than the average. When we've seen a lot of crazy driving out on the streets. So it comes down to training. It comes down to helping them to be able to see how they can better meet the needs of these challenging times by some of the points that I was talking about, being more transparent, by co-creating solutions, not just being the one who says my way or the highway, brings down the strategy from the tablets on the mount, but instead is being transparent about that as possible. But then the rewards for them are actually baked in. Their compensation is baked in to much more of these human-centric aspects of work that I was talking about. You keep people employed. They all feel that they have some development plan that they're going through, and that they're meeting the needs of your customers. I'm not saying this is a magic wand. I'm not saying that there's any silver bullet that actually solves all of this. When suddenly your market gets completely changed, either because of one of the disruptive technologies that Mahan was talking about, or because there's another lockdown and nobody's coming to your restaurant. I'm not saying that these are ways to solve it magically. However, it does come down to training and incentives. That's what we as humans respond to. It's being taught ways, new techniques to be able to use, to be able to build more authentic work, and to be able to still achieve the goals of the organization. And then it comes to compensation. It's ensuring that people have the right incentives to be able to achieve the goals in the context of being more human-centric.
And it's interesting you mentioned training and incentives, Gary. I find the training and incentives of a lot of people in positional power in organizations needs to also be rethought to be able to capture the opportunities for the next rules of work. Now, we've got a couple of questions. Dr. Ethel says, love the foundation thought of mindset as a much needed approach during these contemporary times. Talk a bit about how marketing executes or the membership organization execs, for example, might navigate new hires using the next rules.
Okay. Great question. So first off, skills are not the only answer. They're just the beginning. They're the start. But it's important to frame your needs for humans to do the work of the organization differently. So the first is when you look at a job description. This is unfortunately the way a lot of job descriptions get written. Yeah, the person who had the job before was named Fred, and you loved Fred, and Fred left. So you took Fred's job description and you put a little more color into it, and then you put it out again on Indeed.com, and you hope you're going to get another Fred because you thought Fred was perfect. Well, no Fred shows up, but lots of other people do. If all you've done is you have written the job description in the language of the tasks to be performed, and you've set these completely non-germane requirements like a certain number of years of experience or a certain degree, that's easy for me to say. I don't have enough college stuff into a thimble, but you set requirements that have nothing to do with the performance of the job. They just remind you of Fred, or they're geared towards the specific tasks you think somebody needs to follow in this job. Well, some jobs are task oriented. There's very specific steps to go through, but not many. Most of them are around problems to be solved. You want happy customers. You want to be able to deliver products on time and so on. So first off, thinking about the needs for a work role in the context of the problems to be solved. Secondly, trying to make it as project centric as possible. That is, the work is a series of projects done collaboratively with others. Third, make it a team sport. No manager should go off in a quarter and write a job description. It should be done as part of a team where the team is looking at the skill set that is needed, the problems that need to be solved, and they are co-creating those requirements together. Fourth, you soften the walls of the organization. Look at all those things that I was talking about, ways to be able to have a candidate pool of people you already know, whether it's people in the community, young people that are coming in and doing projects and solving problems for you so they can build up their portfolios, or it's candidates that are doing project work so you can test each other out before you both decide this is the right sort of situation. There's lots of ways to do that, to continually soften the process, to make it as, to soften the walls of the organization, to make it as human-centric as possible and treat all these people, all these potential workers as humans. And then at some point, yes, we've decided we're the right match for each other, but others have already gained something else from that process, including those inside the organization.
And Gary Jane also says, probably an analog question, but after participating in the workforce for almost 40 years, and now a pretty enthusiastic remote worker, I wonder how younger people will learn by observing their more experienced colleagues in action
Yeah.
when everyone is working at their kitchen tables or in their RVs. So many things I learned through unspoken norms and hands-on training and emulating senior coworkers and mentors. How can that informal education continue in asynchronous work settings?
So Jane, it's a huge challenge, and I think just back to sort of challenging the assumptions and that sort of thing. So first off, it's wonderful that you've got that tremendous work experience, and you clearly were a very aware worker in getting those cues from others, and it's wonderful that you had senior coworkers and mentors to depend upon. I do want to challenge how widespread that might be. I think we've had in our minds that that could be a very consistent work experience. And then you talk to a lot of young people, especially more disadvantaged workers, and you talk to workers that have been in pretty rote or repetitive jobs, or a lot of frontline workers. And what you find is that may not be as common an experience for many. Sure, they learned by watching others, but it wasn't that there was some class of mentors that stood up and all helped them. They had to go push and try to get all the help that they could get to try to be able to understand what the rules of work were. So the answer in this era is we have to be more intentional about it. If we left it up to chance, and then the more proactive workers were the ones that could find the mentors and leverage senior coworkers. In the past, again, maybe that worked, probably didn't work for everybody. We have to be more intentional about it. So that means that you have to do far more outreach. You have to do much more fingers on the pulse of how workers are doing. When young people come in, you have to have formalized processes that guarantee that they're going to get access to the mentorship that they need, and nobody falls through the cracks. Now, none of that is going to be as great as it would be if we were already doing that in person in a workplace. But you can do this. Like, this is totally doable. My son, who lives in DC, he's never met his boss. She's based here in San Francisco. They do all sorts of amazing things like cooking classes together, and they are she's continually doing outreach to him and making sure that you have what you need to do your work. And we just had this meeting. Do you understand what we were talking about? Because I realized I didn't prepare you as much for that. You have to be more intentional about those things. And if you benefited from them yourself, well, then I think that's on your shoulders too. That's the, if we've gotten that, if we've been able to develop that over time, then let's look for ways we can become those mentors that fill in the cracks for those workers.
I love your emphasis on intentionality, Gary, which can really help us recreate a different set of norms at work. Jane, half jokingly, half seriously says, interesting perspective. I also learned by avoiding lots of bad behaviors I watched at work in the newsroom, which can also be the case, Jane. I have to tell you, though, Gary, I've got a 15-year-old, and she plays Roblox. If any of you have not watched kids play Roblox, she goes to a nightclub, and she can do all kinds of dances that in my life I could never do, and get almost as much enjoyment as I ever got going to an actual nightclub. So part of I think what we need to do is understand that the norms are going to change. Now, there needs to be intentionality behind it. A mistake that I've seen a lot of organizations make is they say there was value in water cooler conversations. Let's schedule Zoom water cooler sessions, which have been total flops. So to your point, Gary, there has to be intentionality. Any final thoughts, Gary, before we wrap up the session?
So first, I just want to again acknowledge, I mean, we don't get to choose the time we're born into. These are challenging times, and I just want to honor everybody in the community on the call and watching the video that excuse me, this isn't easy stuff. And we might have wished that it didn't happen on our watch, that we all had retired out before the pandemic hit. But these are the cards that were dealt. So first off, I think it's important to just acknowledge that. Secondly, do what you need to do to take care of you. It's real. We don't have a sort of Fitbit for mental health. We don't see when our stress levels are peaking, or when we have others that are so reliant on us. We don't see when that happens. And so in this next period, it's going to be easy for us to stop being intentional about this stuff and to just think about going back to sort of default processes. That whole idea of alternating rhythms and maintaining the control in your life of doing what you do best when you do it best and with whom you do it best. I just want to encourage that as a mindset going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Gary. The Next Rules of Work is an outstanding book. We will send out Gary's also a website. He mentioned eParachute. I didn't mention at the beginning. Gary started his career working for his father, who had started the What Color Is Your Parachute books, a minister that ended up writing 50 some versions, iterations of that book, helping people with their careers. Gary has continued doing that, not just in Silicon Valley, but globally. Last time we met in DC, Gary was coming back right from a trip to Greece, which was wonderful. And thank you, Gary put also in the chat the New Rules of Work, which is his book, the website, Carol Dweck's book, which is outstanding, Mindset, and then
Distributed Teams by John O'Dwyn. Yeah, great book.
Teams, wonderful. I haven't read that. I appreciate that also. So thank you so much, Gary. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a wonderful time, and look forward to seeing you, Gary, in person, and everyone else in person too.
All right. Be well, folks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.